Hey guys, Ron from Wild Better Fish USA. This is the FunctionBuilt-Aquatics edition of Wild Better Fish USA. Today we're going to discuss the maintenance that I do on my paludarium, how I do, what I do, and when I do it. So this tank gets water changes 3 times a week, usually not much less than that. And I'm typically changing about 5 gallons of water 3 times a week. The volume of this tank is about 13 gallons. This tank is based on a 20-gallon long, missing about a quarter of its height. I bought this tank from an aquarium shop that was going out of business a few years ago. And these tanks were built by a aquarium manufacturer to fit his shelves for his saltwater rack system, of which he was selling corals out of these tanks. These tanks were drilled, and at that point they were easy and cheap to pick up. So I decided that it would make a pretty good tank for the paludarium. If I would have had my choice, this tank would have been rimless, but that was not in the plan in the beginning when Nate and I built this tank over 5 years ago. Yes, this tank has been running for 5 years, or plants have been in this tank for close to 5 years, some within the past 2 for sure. Now, excuse my large butt as I show you how I do a siphon and I pull some of the water out of the tank. So what I'll do is I'm going to pull about a quarter of the water out of the tank, which comes out to being about 4.5 to 5 gallons. So we'll do the water change, and then we're going to clean the glass of the diatoms that typically grow. And I get brown diatoms on the glass, and it's typically from a window I have where the tank is direct sunlight. It's not a big nuisance, but I typically like to keep the tank clean. Showing right now my big in Indonesia Baryancistrus frog t-shirt. That's our boy Frog. Frog also over 5 years in our captivity, doing well, and it has spawned hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of fry for us in the past. He's now living in the 55-gallon tank, in the community tank, of which we're thinking about maybe putting him back into a breeding setup just to continue to get some more fry from him. So I'm pulling the water out of the tank, and it'll go into the 5-gallon bucket. My hose, the bucket, the toothbrush, and the baster, all the equipment that I use on this tank are only used on this tank. This way I don't cross-contaminate. That's my pre-filter sponge for the water that comes out of the tank before it goes into the Eheim canister filters, which are basically connected to each other in a battery. I have one very large 2517 Eheim canister, and then it runs into, I believe, which is the 2412 or 2416, which is the smallest Eheim canister that they build. The small one is not connected and is not running on its own. It basically is water's being pushed through it via the larger canister. And in the small canister, I just keep only biological filtration media. So once I'm done doing the hose, once I'm done pulling the water, here's my big in Indonesia frog. And this is our tribute to Frog, our wild Baryancistrus. Once I'm done with the pulling the water out of the tank, I like to take whatever product I use, get it away from the tank, not keep things cluttered. So I'm using a toothbrush, like I mentioned before, to clean the glass. And this toothbrush is specific only to this tank. It's only used on this tank. So when I bleach this toothbrush, the hose, the bucket, once or twice a month, I still know I'm not cross-contaminating. So the sand in this tank tends to build up from the right side to the left because of the Gyro 1000 that you're not seeing in this video. I took the Gyro 1000 out, and I'm soaking it in water with some peroxide just to clean it out a little bit. But it tends to get pushed from the right to the left. So later on, I'll pull some of that sand over with my hand and push it back over to the right-hand side. It just happens this way pretty much every 2 weeks or so. The sand tends to build up. It's typical of a high-volume setup. If I would have put some gravel in the sand and maybe give it a little bit of extra weight, it probably wouldn't do that so much. But I didn't want to put gravel. I want the sand to be just pure sand and pretty easy to clean and vacuum. You put gravel in it, now gravel gets sucked up into the siphon tube and creates a little bit of an issue. It's not as easy to clean the sand when you have gravel on it. I've noticed that in the past. The fish in this tank are fed heavy, so that's why I do water changes like I do. Anybody who breeds and keeps plecos, I'm not saying I do, but I do keep my golden nugget, and this tank was designed originally for my black water fish. Now this tank was basically redesigned to fit the golden nugget plecos environment, which typically could be the area of the Rio Xingu, high water flow, high dissolved oxygen, and temperatures above 81 degrees. So right now I'm basically squeezing out the pre-filter sponge in the tank water that I pulled out of the tank, the water that's in the bucket. I won't use tap because you don't want to kill the beneficial bacteria that's in the sponge. Even though it's not a biological filter, you still want to keep the bacteria alive and doing well. So I just rinse it off in the aquarium water. Now I'll put that back onto the strainer, and that will pre-filter the water before it goes in the Eheim canister battery. And what that'll do is extend the life of your filter media inside the Eheim. So I'm going to continue to clean the glass on the other side because the diatoms grow pretty much every 2 to 3 days, and mostly because of the direct sunlight, like I mentioned prior. Excuse me for blocking some of the video. For the most part, this is a very tight space, but you can pretty much get the gist. So I'm going to pull the sand over and kind of shoo over one of our whiptail plecos. I added a trio of whiptails to this. They're doing awesome in this setup. They love the water flow, the pH, the temperature. They're eating really well, and the golden nugget seems not to be too disturbed by them. Doesn't take them as direct competitors. Unfortunately, the golden nugget right now is hiding, so we're not going to see him. As we all know, most plecos are very, very secretive, and the golden nugget, Baryancistrus type species, no different, very shy. Matter of fact, it's very rare I get a chance to see the entire fish come out, and as soon as I make a move, he sees me, he hides. Still, he's one of many I tried, and he's the one out of a good amount of them that I tried that has flourished and is eating like a little pig. So this is the turkey baster that I use only on this tank, and I'll use that to take some of the sand off the rocks and disperse some of the sand properly. I use a turkey baster pretty often to also take some of the material that builds up on the Java 1000. We'll show the Java 1000 later in this video. That is my water moving device that is changed the game for me in keeping the golden nugget happy and flourishing. That, getting the temperature above 82 degrees in this tank. The temperature fluctuates between 81.5 to 82.5. And so far, I haven't noticed any stress at all with the whiptails. It's probably the highest portion of their range temperature-wise, but they seem to be doing pretty well. But I do know that the golden nugget wouldn't flourish in temperatures pretty much below 80 degrees. They do like it warm, discus warm. Talking about discus, when I show you the water that I use, which is RODI water, I use this new discus buffer that CChem makes, and it buffers the pH between 5.9 to 6.9 in that range. And I like to try to keep this tank as close to 7.0 as I possibly can. But my tap water's pH is well above 8, sometimes even as close to 8.5. So now the bucket's full, and we're going to take that water and we're going to use some of it on our plants, and the rest of it we're just going to push it down the sink and get rid of it. When I come back, I'm going to bring in my water RODI bucket, and basically that is just a extra water bottle that I use, and that holds about 5 gallons of water, roughly about 5 gallons of water. And I'll make that water up about 3 days or so before I do my water change. And I also put a heater in there to get that temperature about 82 degrees so it matches the temperature of the tank. And then I add my buffer, and I oxygenate it with an air zone, an air stone, sorry. This way everything is mixed up well, highly oxygenated. And then once I put that water in the tank, it's not much different, if at all, than the water that was in there prior, just with a lot less organics. So this is the Gyro 1000 I was talking about. This is the product that I use to move water in this tank. And I will say that this product has changed the game for me in keeping Baryancistrus type plecos. So for the most part, without this, I don't think I would have had the success. Now this is dialed back to about 10%. So at 10%, it's plenty strong enough to move water in this tank. At 50%, it's strong enough to push water over the other side of the tank and hit the wall. So its footprint in this particular setup is rather powerful. And as far as I'm concerned, the footprint of it is perfect size. It doesn't stick out like a sore thumb. But like I mentioned, it's a necessary evil. Now that's the actual manifold that you could program the different water settings, and I keep it at 10% in straight water flow, basically like a river. So we're not going to turn that on, of course, until we fill the tank back up. But since that was soaking in the bucket with some peroxide and warm water, that'll kill some of the bacteria and algae that typically will grow on it. So now we're going to come in with our water from our water jug. And I like to typically unplug the heater about 30 minutes or so before I do my water change, just so the heater doesn't crack. But Eheim heaters are pretty good at withstanding cracking, so they shut off and they don't build up heat like some of your cheaper heaters. This thing's pretty heavy. My guess is probably, I don't know, about 5 or 6 pounds per gallon. So I'm holding about 5 gallons of water in there. You may want to do half the size of half the volume of this when you do your water change. And then I'm pouring this water directly on top of a large rock in the tank, which will disperse the water without pushing sand everywhere and messing with the aquascape. I noticed that the plecos always seem to spunk up after a water change. They do like water changes. So all fish, water changes are the most important part. No matter what I do to a tank, a water change is the most important part. And I feed my fish heavy. All right, so now that's done. So now we're going to go over and we're going to turn everything on and make sure that the Gyro 1000 is working well. I keep an air stone pushing oxygenated water below the Gyro 1000, just so I can get some of those fine air bubbles going on in the tank, and that helps me keep the water oxygenated. So now stay tuned for the next video, which I will show you just a basic water test that I do for pH and keeping the pH somewhere close to neutral, even though the discus buffer is a little bit below neutral. But like I mentioned before, my tap water is pretty high. So stay tuned for more next video. And this is basic maintenance you can use for any of your aquariums, paludariums, planet tanks, or just fish only. Stay tuned for more, guys. Wild Better Fish USA. Thanks. Okay, guys, like I mentioned prior, we're going to test the pH using your standard API type kit. This is actually API. So we're going to go 3 drops, and we're going to add water to the vial, which we already did, right to the white line. And we're going to shake it up and add our 3 drops. And then I'm going to do a little slight mix back and forth. I don't like to shake the vial too hard. Now I'm looking for neutral. Neutral is the range I want to maintain the paludarium. The Golden Nugget Pleco's pH range is between 6.0 and about 7.2. I mean, it could fluctuate a little bit below that, especially if there's heavy rains in the Amazon. But the water's flowing, and what happens is in flowing water, you don't get organics build up, which typically will lower your pH too low. But in a closed environment, you're going to have issues sometimes with pH, which is why water changes are very important. Remove the organics, keep the pH stable. As you tell by the actual color chart itself, we are at neutral. That's what I want. Neutral is safe for me with this type of fish. I'm trying to maintain this tank in the standard, safest way possible. Thank you, guys. Okay, guys, so the end result is pristine. Everything's clean. Water change is complete. Gyro 1000 is moving water like I wanted to. Highly oxygenated, warm water flowing through a 13-gallon paludarium. Basically redesigned to maintain successfully Baryancistrus, xanthellus, the golden nugget pleco. So stay tuned for more on this particular setup. This is the FunctionBuilt-Aquatics edition of Wild Better Fish USA. Thanks, guys. See ya.
I don't know why.